So first of all, let me say hello to everyone. I see some familiar faces. Hi, Eliran. Funny to see you on the other side of the screen after teaching you this year. And hello, Eva and Mariana. Nice to see you. Who else? Any Pardes alum who can raise their hand? Hi, oh, Shira. How are you doing? So nice to see you. Who else? Not an alum, well, kind of an alum, almost a student at TVA. Hi, Elliot. Nice to see you. I see people popping up. Who else? Pardes alums that I can say hello to? Leanna, I see is here, which is nice. Jeff, I feel like you were in a class we've met before, possibly. Maybe. Okay. So I want to just welcome, past, present, and future Pardes students. Wait, who else? Sarah Leah, is that you?
Listen, honey, sorry, but my 1:30 Zoom just started, but she's still saying hello to people.
Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. So as people come in, I'm just going to say a few words about Pardes, and really, there's something very cyclical about this session, because here we are, and last year at this time, I started doing Yemei Iyun Passover prep classes on Zoom. And who knew that we'd still be here a year later. However, I will say, to Pardes's credit, they've managed, or we have managed, to really create uninterrupted Torah that is connecting global communities. Like, we've created this incredible global community of people learning Torah from around the world, different time zones. And so Zoom has really opened up opportunity to learn together, even if we're not in Israel, which of course, learning in Jerusalem is the ultimate. But Pardes, for those who don't know, is an open, inclusive, diverse, and intellectually challenging Jewish learning community. I love teaching here. Really, I always tell my 18-year-old gap year seminary students they need to grow up and come to Pardes. It's really a place where I don't have to edutain. I don't have to convince people of the value of analyzing text, immersing in text, studying text. And so I'm excited that we have this opportunity to learn together. And I just want to call your attention to a few upcoming events while people are still coming in. There's a webinar on March 17th. Is that correct, Haley? Did I remember the date? March 17th?
This Wednesday, yes.
This Wednesday, and it's going to be about upcoming Pardes, about studying at Pardes. Give us a little more information, Haley.
Yes, the webinar on this coming Wednesday is about the year or semester program specifically. So I am sending a link in the chat right now if you're interested in learning more about what it means to study immersively at Pardes in Jerusalem for the year or for a semester. You should feel free to sign up. If you know anybody else who might be interested as well, feel free to send them the link to sign up. And I hope to see you or your friends or family there.
Yeah, please come. Yeah, next year we're gonna be past this whole Corona thing. It's gonna be like a form of redemption. There is also the Pardes Passover Challenge. I have to say, I don't even know what to say. I did the Purim Challenge, the Pardes Purim Challenge. It was 10 summary. I think it was 10 classes summarizing the tractate of Megillah. This is going to be a summary of the Mishnayot in tractate Pesachim. Really a challenge to follow every podcast every day. Pardes is challenging you. Definitely recommended. Haley's going to put the link there how you can get into that. And upcoming summer programs. How can I not mention that? Summer is the most vibrant time. Really, I'm hoping on Zoom we'll be able to capture some of that vibrancy. There is the Pardes Learning Seminar, which I'm directing, which is July 4th to July 8th, which is going to be a very immersive, how can it not be, 5 days on Zoom with the theme is courage and resilience. In the summer, we have back-to-back two-week summer programs. Really, it's 8 sessions each program, and the theme is dreaming. Although I feel like Alex gave it a better name. Do you know what he's calling it?
I believe it's called Into the Light.
Into the Light, right? And so Haley's going to post some information there, and really an opportunity to learn with our wonderful, wonderful faculty. Such a privilege for me to be on this faculty and to be teaching with such wonderful teachers, and to have people like Haley who are scaffolding all the time so that someone like myself can be on Zoom without having to begin to multitask and completely lose it. So thank you, Haley, for your help. Okay, so what we're going to get started, what I'd like people to do without further ado, What we're going to be talking about tonight is, or today, or this morning, wherever you are, is the role that customs play in our lives. So if people can maybe, even though we're on Zoom, you could write it in the chat. What is a custom? It could be about Passover or not, but something that really, when I say, what's a custom in your family? What's a minhag? If you could write something, what are things that your family does? It could be for a birthday, it could be for an anniversary, it could be for May Day, whatever, it could be for Passover. But what are some customs that when you think of your family really reflect some of the traditions that we all have? So let's take a look at what's coming up. I'm sorry I did not do a Padlet next time. I'm going to get that, Haley, next year. I'm going to know Padlet. Okay, eat black-eyed peas on New Year's. Okay, kidney oat. Finger puppets at the Seder, nice. Dipping eggs in salt water. Crumb contest with Manischewitz cake mix, that I've never heard of. I've never heard of, there was another one there that was new to me. But kidney oat, yes, that's one of the differences between Sephardi and Ashkenazi communities. So thanks for keeping us on Pesach. Blessing our kids and our dog, love that, even if the kids are away in school. I have one daughter who calls me to ask for a bracha, but I didn't think of it on my own. Giving appreciations for birthdays. Chocolate matzah, afikomen, baseball Passover trivia game, right? Trying to bring something in that the kids are going to respond to. So we see that some of the customs, I'm getting a few more, so I'm just going to read a few more because I love this. I love hearing what other people do. We've got my mom calls to bracha us before Shabbat, dressing up as Moses and Pharaoh and using a blue scarf to cross the Red Sea. Great. And I'm not sure what Erica +1 means. Oh, Erica, I see. The black-eyed peas on Rosh Hashanah. Yeah, they're definitely the holidays or the Sabbath, Shabbat, is a time where often our customs reflect something very particular about our family. Manischewitz crumb cakes contest is something very particular to that family. And then there are customs that reflect our affiliation with the community, right? And so we have the black-eyed peas on Rosh Hashanah, which really comes more from the Sephardi communities. Kidney oat as well, and eating legumes on Passover is more reflective of Mediterranean and Middle Eastern Sephardi communities. And so sometimes it's very particular to my family. What birthdays look like is often very individual to the family. And sometimes it's more communal, right? I come from a certain community. And sometimes it is actually universal, Jewish and universal, like the blessings on Friday night. I love the fact, Jeff, that you mentioned the dog. My daughter just got a dog. We're not a dog family. I'm babysitting my grand dog. I joke, I have a grand dog. And you really, suddenly I realized how significant pets are. It's a new experience for me. So I can appreciate that. And that's something unique perhaps to Jeff's family. And yet many of us bless our children, either when they're home or even when they go away, continuing that connection. So what I want to do with as we begin to delve into these texts is, a lot of us are interested, especially as we emerge into adulthood and onward. Where do our customs come from? And one of the things I'm going to talk about in the course, and I hope you'll share with me as well. So, I'll have a discussion. What happens in the moment where you discover that the origin of a custom is really kind of dumb? Like, it has no really good reason. What do we do in that moment when we discover, like, oh, we thought this was a really sacred space and a sacred custom and so on, and then we unpack it all the way back, and we discover there really wasn't a very good reason. There isn't a very good reason for what we do. And what happens if we go to someone's house and we discover they're doing a kind of dumb custom that they think is really significant, but we Jewish educators and rabbis and pastors and so on and so forth know better? Is it good to enlighten people? Oh, well, the origin of your practice is a pagan ritual that took place in ancient Greece. So again, we're going to see a variety of texts in the Talmud that very interestingly recognize the significance that practice has in shaping people's identity. And do you really want to take that away from people, even if it sometimes leads to mistakes, to stringencies, to errors? Like, what is the price we pay for being so enlightened, right? For being so textual, for for scaffolding all the way back to the first brick and being like, oh, now I know where that comes from. It doesn't really mean anything, right? Can meaning exist when things don't always make sense or aren't rationally, filled with rational integrity and truth and so on? So I hope this will be a topic that we can all connect to in some way. I think especially for the younger students, right? Discovering where is my identity from and why do I do the things we do. For the older folks, and I'm already in that cat, right? What my children are questioning, my grandchildren may be questioning, what kind of answers do I give? And certainly this is a wonderful topic for Passover, because we are entering the holiday in which the question answer format is so central. And yet many of the questions on Passover night are silly. They don't really have good answers, right? It's the idea of getting the kids to be engaged, getting kids to love the baseball trivia game, fantastic example, right? We don't necessarily only want to focus on the Exodus story. We want to make it something that the kids remember, something that's fun, something that's contemporary. Okay, so I'm going to open up my source sheet. What I've done is, I know Haley shared it and some of you got it by email. I have created a source sheet with questions. So when I send you to breakout rooms, which I'm going to do, and I'm going to kind of manually, automatically mix you up. I'm going to let Zoom assign you chavrutas, which I hope will be fun. And we'll take some time also in the breakout rooms to explore the text, right? That's what Pardes does. We want you to like immerse, explore, feel it, interpret it, and we'll come back, of course, and continue the discussion. So let's open up and see what we have here. Hold on now, of course, I checked to make sure it was on my screen, and now I don't see it. And show all windows. Okay, hold on a minute. Okay, I'm gonna have to open the link that Haley has put out because I somehow had it when I started teaching and now I don't. So give me one more moment. There it now. Okay. Let's see if I can find it. If I can't, then Haley, I might have you open it. Oh, here it is. Okay, I found it. All is good. After a year of doing Zoom, I should be doing this in my sleep. Okay. The custom, we could write a Haggadah about the customs of Zoom, like what silly, like Zoom, right? Someone's going to write Nishtana, what is different about this night, and include a Zoom question. So, let me ask you something, and maybe people can put this in the chat. What do you think the difference between custom and law is? Right? What is the difference between things we do that we're calling minhag or custom and things that we call halacha or law? And I would say we can go outside religious space, but because we're dealing with Jewish text, I'm gonna focus on Jewish law and Jewish custom. But I often like people to go in and out of the text, right? Like you can broaden it. Sometimes there are customs in a community, and that's just the way we hang our Christmas lights, or that's the way the ordinance is in the community. It's not law. Okay, so anyone want to weigh in? What are some of the differences? Anyone? Law. When I say law, what jumps out? What do you think? Halacha, a Jewish law. What is that about? Custom feels intrinsic, law feels imposed from the outside. Okay, so custom comes from within, law comes from without. Halakha is a sense of requiredness, I have to do it, and it's applicable more broadly. Yes, right, so the laws of Shabbat affect everybody. Maybe the way we heat up food on Shabbat is going to be different. The law of not cooking is going to be everyone. Law is rabbinic or Torah law, very good. And what about custom? We threw out a few customs. I talked a little bit about custom offers comfort, right? There's something more familiar, something more maybe about identity. Law feels like rules about, and custom feels like the how, nice. Elevating or adding to the law, maybe. Okay, thank you, Saralea. Law is fixed, custom is more flexible, can be adaptable. I want you, Hannah, we're going to come back to that, whether custom could be more adaptable. Custom could be required by social setting pressure, very good. And it may have had a practical origin at one point. And Jeff, I'm going to come back to that because we're going to talk a little bit about kitniot at some point, which is really an excellent example of a lot of what we're talking about. And it's a good time of year to do that. Okay, so now going back to the source sheet. I hope you'll be waiting for me. Oh, here it is. Let's go back to the source sheet. Okay. So one of the questions, I'm going to learn this Mishnah with you, meaning I'm not going to have you do this in breakout room. I'm going to allow this to be the first source. Why is it not going down? Oh, come on. It's not supposed to happen. Okay, we're going to open the Mishnah. Makom shenahagu la'asot melacha ba'arvei Pesachim ad chatzot osin. Makom shenahagu shelo la'asot ein osin. Okay. In a place where the people were accustomed to perform labor on Passover Eve until midday, one may do so. In a place where they were accustomed not to perform labor, one may not do so. Okay, so what we have here, this is purely customs. It's about behavior on the eve of the holiday of Passover. And some communities work, and some communities there is no work. Okay. So what do you think? I mean, someone already suggested, no, that's good. Okay, Haley, I'm having problems here in getting my source sheet. Maybe you want to open it and I'll have you, for some reason, I'm having a problem going down to page 2. So I'm going to not spend time figuring this out, but I'm going to talk a little bit about this Mishnah. It's the Mishnah, and it's a very important Mishnah. It's an important Mishnah because of the conversation that comes after it. And it's important Mishnah because we start having this idea of custom. What is a custom? How binding is a custom? And what we discover is custom is actually very binding. Is there any prohibition to work on the eve of Passover? Thumbs up. Is there a prohibition to work? Anyone want to give me a thumbs up to work on Friday or on the eve of Passover? Is there, so there's no prohibition. So basically no thumbs up. So you would say thumbs down, no prohibition, right? There's no prohibition on the eve of Passover. So why is it that some places are very stringent about sharing on the eve of Passover, and some places are very lenient? Of course, everyone works on the eve of Passover. No one works on the eve of Passover. That's largely what we're talking about. Anyone want to unmute and just give, weigh in? Why would this be a practice, and why is it so binding? It's very black and white. Either you work or you don't work. There's nothing in between. We're going to talk a little bit about in between, but for the purpose of our Mishnah, some communities work, some communities don't work. It is not a prohibition to work or not work, but nonetheless, it is a custom. Okay, what might, yes, Sarah Leah.
My first thought was probably who's like ruling like the Jewish people at that time. Like if it is a country that they're living in where they have to answer to others for work, then they probably will still have to work. And if there's one place where like they have more leniency or understanding, or it's like Israel where it's a Jewish country where they understand that, then like that can make the custom would be to not work.
So you're saying, okay, so maybe it has something to do with the type of a country and maybe secular, religious as Israel. Okay, that's one possibility. Someone else? Yeah, Elliot.
There are still things. There's still things to do, right? We burn the chametz in the morning, and it takes time. If you're at work, you can't easily do that. Going to siyum early in the morning.
So you're saying, Elliot, there are so many things to do on the eve of Passover that some communities say, look, if people go to work, they may not fulfill their religious obligations on this day. And as a result, we as a community, it's very important to us that people fulfill their religious obligations. And so we're going to have a clear directive. No one works. We're a community where no one works. Okay, great. So why would a community yes work? Why might a community yes have the practice to work? Any thoughts? Why might a community? So a community that's interested in making sure you burn the chametz, you finish eating your chametz, you burn your chametz, all within the time, it's very time sensitive. So we're going to be very, especially on the eve of Passover, very careful. Why might a community work? With so many people working virtually. Yes, Aviva. The definition of going to work has shifted a little. Okay, good. But why might some communities, nonetheless, let's say super religious, ultra-Orthodox communities, still have people working? This is going to come up in financial impact. Good. And any of you, maybe all of you already have done all your Passover shopping, cooking, prepare, so that on the eve of Passover, you can focus on what's really important. But some of us forget the matzah meal, the potato starch, the oil, right? I need stores to be open. Meaning in some communities, I would imagine, I'm going to make a yucky joke, right? In the yuckish communities in Germany, where things are very, very structured and people are very careful to follow the rules, one can imagine in a community like that, no one's going to forget the matzah meal and the oil. They're going to be completely prepared. And so then the eve of Passover, they can focus on mitzvot and preparing for the Seder. But in many other communities, right, practically, I forgot to get a pair of shoes. I need to go to the tailor. I need to go to the supermarket, right? If you go to a Haredi community on the eve of Passover, on the eve of any holiday, on the eve of Shabbat, it's frenetic. You know, entire communities where stores are open sometimes far later than in the secular population, because this idea of like being ready for Shabbos or buying that one last thing for Shabbos, because once Shabbos starts, you're not going to be able to do anything, or once Passover starts, often there's the financial impact, right? Great day to make money, and there's the population that needs to make money. So it's interesting that the Mishnah brings to me different communities with very strict regulations about something that's completely optional, right? It's going to be the identity of the community that is going to define whether we work or not. Let me see now if I can find my source sheet again. I'm having a hard time. Okay, here, maybe this is it. Let's hope. Yes, this is it. Okay, so I want to go down a little bit. Now I want to show you something, and this is very interesting, and this will have impact in terms of another example. I'm going to connect to it, and then I'm going to send you to breakout rooms. What happens? Haholech mimakom she'osin lemakom she'ein osin. Let's say I move to a new community, and the practice in my community was to work on the eve of Passover, and so I move my business to a community in which the practice is not to work. And someone mentioned financial impact. There's an enormous financial impact, right? I'm going to lose a day of work, a day where I normally made an enormous amount of money, enough for the month's salary, so I could take off for the 7 days of Passover. And suddenly in this community, I'm not able to do that. Can I bring my custom into this new community? But wait a minute, now I moved from a community where we don't work and everyone's working. And if I don't work, people look at me and are like, what are you, lazy? You're a slacker? What is wrong with you? I mean, of course, we're all open on the eve of Passover. These are not small differences. And now the Mishnah says something that's completely unfeasible. You take the stringencies of the community you came from and the stringencies of the community you went to. So basically, you lose either way, right? It seems like if you move to a new community, you both have to reflect your old community's practices and your new community's practices, which is kind of a stalemate. And now the last line of the Mishnah is, now we understand what the concern of the Mishnah is. The concern of the Mishnah is, if you begin importing new practices, new customs into a community in which that's not the practice, it's going to cause tremendous difference of opinion and fighting and divergency, right? Machloket, not in a good way, not machloket l'shem shamayim, right? Machloket, quarreling and quibbling. Let me thumbs up, and this might be that. How many of you have had a community where a new synagogue opened, or a new leader comes in, and something new in the Jewish community, right? Someone new comes in, and the minyan is always at 8. Suddenly in this synagogue, the minyan's at 10, right? That brings a different practice, and it starts to split the community. Anyone have any thumbs up? Anyone have a community? Yeah. Now, sometimes the community is resilient, and there's a kind of a machloket l'shem. We talk and we try to work it out and so on, and sometimes it never gets worked out. And the Mishnah is very concerned for that moment. It's thinking communally, what happens to a community in which a new custom, foreign to the community, antithetical to the way the community practices, is imported? What is the impact on the community, right? And I would say that happens in families as well. Again, I'll ask for any thumbs up. Anyone, and I'll be anecdotal. Any carnivores who have a child who became a vegan, or vegan who have a child who became a carnivore? Anyone familiar with that scenario? Right? So that's not what, obviously, hopefully we're all very respectful, but there's a moment when a person in the family decides to change their practice, whether it's about what they eat or how they dress or how they keep religion or don't keep religion. And then we begin to feel off kilter, and we begin to feel that there's something not smooth about this surface, right? We're not pulling together, and that could be very threatening. And so that's a little bit of what I want to talk about as I send you to the next sources, right? Why are customs so important to identity? What happens if something new comes into the community? Can the community make room for both customs? I mean, I think we live in a postmodern world where we do try to respectfully integrate multiple practices. We do, and the Mishnah would be astonished at our resilience and ability to do that. But the Mishnah also recognizes what is still true today, that sometimes it's very threatening, right? Certain customs of standing or sitting for certain aspects of liturgy. Yeah, you're bringing up something, Jeff, that to an outsider would seem ludicrously trivial. Who cares? And yet, oh my God, communities can rise and fall on the change in a practice. What you sat during Kaddish, we all stand. How dare you sit, right? And this somehow someone's custom that is different from our own is more threatening, and I'm going to say, than law. In other words, halacha, oh, I can respect that's halacha. I can respect that. You have a different rabbi and a different halacha. Somehow customs are more complicated because we all feel, but you cannot not to. You don't have to buy in. You can change your custom. What's the big deal? What is the big deal about a custom? And sometimes, and I'm going to talk about, the custom is actually more rigid than the law. Okay, which again is counterintuitive, and yet that is we see that. Wait, I see it. Let me open up. I see there's some before I send you to breakout rooms, which I'm about to do. How do you find community? Geographic location, leaders, right? Ethnicity, right? We have different. We have Sephardim, we have Ashkenazim, right? Ethnicity, maybe is that what defines it? Does gender define it, right? And so on. So what I'm going to do, let me just take a look at what I want you to do in Chavruta. I'm going to send you shortly. So the next, we finished the Mishnah. Oh, this is great. Okay, good. As you read the story below, as you'll see, each new text, we're on page, this is page 2, I hope. Yes, it's page 2 of the source sheet. And on page 2, I have questions that are about the story below. That's where I want you to start. No, yeah, it's page 2. And then you could just keep going. I'm going to send you for about 20 minutes of Chavruta. There are a number of stories and anecdotes, and there are questions before every unit of text. So whatever you get to is fine. There is no, meaning it's some people I know like to move quickly, some like to move slowly. Yes, Elliot, hold on one second. And I would say, I certainly would not want you to go past page 5, 6. But it's hard for me to believe you're going to get that far anyway. Yes, Elliot. Did you have a question? I didn't know. It sounded like you had your hand up. Anyone have a question? Okay, so I'm going to send you to breakout rooms. There are 32 people, so I'm going to create. Yes, Anne, did you have your hand up? Anne Kahan. No, you. Let me unmute you.
Mute.
Yeah, now
We're
I am.
going to a breakout room and we're going to just do what?
Yeah, so what you're going to do is the source sheet from page 2 through page 5, let's say. You don't have to do all of that. I'm just giving you options, right? Every unit of text has like 3 or 4 questions before the unit of text, starting on page 2, for you to take into your learning. That's it. That's what you're doing. We're continuing this discussion about when can we change a custom. You're going to see the first source is already going to, what happens if the children no longer want to keep the custom? Do we have to keep a custom that our parents or grandparents set up? So that's the first text, and it's going to go from there. So that's what you're going to do. I'm going to send you to breakout rooms kind of randomly. I hope you got some learning done. I know it was a little short and a little erratic. I know it was too short. Sorry, Stephanie, but we only have till 9 o'clock. I want to be respectful of your time and the program's time. And so I wanted to have some time to go over some of the sources. I assume you all got through the first text, which was about the sons from Beit Shan who are really stuck with this custom of their fathers Now, the custom of the father was not to travel to Tyre, to Tzur on Fridays. Any thoughts why that custom was put into practice? What do you think they decided? Why would shopkeepers, businessmen, market people, and so on not work, not travel? Yes, Miriam?
Well, something could happen to their vehicle, their way of getting there, and they would be stuck or they'd have to fix it. And, what would they
And
do?
don't violate Shabbat.
Right, they don't want to violate Shabbat. And so they have chosen, they clearly make enough money 5 days a week so that they do not need to work on Friday and Saturday, right? I remember going to a falafel store, for those who know Jerusalem, at the Pot Junction on Friday. I'd been wanting to try it out and it was closed. And I thought, wow, they must make a lot of money 5 days a week so that they can take a day off. No one takes Fridays off, right? But clearly their custom was not to work on Friday, and financially they could do it. Great. But then
Right.
you get the next generation.
And
And
they
the
need
next
the
gen-
money.
what?
And they need the money.
They need the money. They need the money. But here you have let's assume it wasn't just one generation. It was their fathers, it was their grandfathers, and so on. And now they come to Rabbi Yochanan and they say to Rabbi Yochanan, we want you, there's nothing wrong with working on Friday. Everyone around us is working and traveling on Friday to the market, and we can't afford to continue the practice of our fathers. And Rabbi Yochanan is very hard-lined about it. Can anyone defend Rabbi Yochanan in forcing them to continue their father's practice? What might he be concerned with? Anyone want to jump in? Because if we're talking about identity, what is Rabbi Yochanan concerned with? He brings a verse from Proverbs, meaning it's not long. It's so easy to permit. It seems like, what's the big deal? Why is he taking a hard line? Yeah, go
What
ahead.
about like honoring
Jeff,
one's
go ahead.
honoring a father, honoring a mother, honoring
Okay,
their
so honoring the parent, the father or the mother, forgetting where they come from. Leanna wrote lessening the honor to Shabbat, maybe because you're taking a chance. Although I would say of the three, that in some ways is the least convincing, because you have all these Orthodox Jews traveling to the marketplace and getting back. For the most part, it doesn't happen. But their father's way was to, or their ancestors' way was to especially honor. And once that starts breaking down, that diverging from practices, Rabbi Yochanan is clearly afraid. It is about honor to our ancestors, because of course Judaism is about tracing back our traditions and our practices and our Torah all the way back to Sinai. This is very specific to this family. And this fear, if you unravel something central to the way the family has operated, a practice of the family, obviously it's very easy then to throw a lot of other things away. So while I think Rabbi Yochanan, by the way, is incorrect here, meaning I think a more compassionate, nuanced posek, rabbinic authority, would have been more evaluated, more clear. What are you talking about, and how much more money? And is it about greed? Is it about feeding your children? Right? It's a story. And so the story doesn't give us the nuance. In real life, obviously, a rabbinic authority answering a question like that would have been more nuanced. But what Rabbi Yochanan represents for me is the fear of what happens when children start deviating from practices
tradition
that have defined their families for generations, and suddenly the child says, we don't want to do it anymore. We want to make more money. Do they really need more money? Again, it's a story. But I think we could stop here. We're not going to, because I want to get on to the Rabban Gamliel stories, the stories of the Gamliels, which are fantastic, but they're all fantastic. But in this unit, we see Rabbi Yochanan's concern. What happens when the child diverges from the practice of the previous generations? What is that going to do to the whole structure of this family, of the way that they their customs and their identity and so on? And those are good questions. I think they are questions that are worthy considering, even though halakhically we could obviously answer that, right? It's not binding in the same way.
But it's also a good segue into sort of the next set of stories, because in some ways, Rabbi Yonatan is setting it up as halakha, as customs equal halakha.
Yes, very good, right. So it's right. He's treating it as if this is a halakha. He quotes Proverbs, right, Proverbs is not a source of law, but it reminds us, as I don't know who said it, that honor thy father and mother, right? So it reminds us of the mandate. He does not quote the 10 Commandments. That's very significant. He quotes Proverbs, which is not the same thing, right? It's a text that does not have legal significance. Nonetheless, it has a lot of religious significance. Okay, let's take a look at the next source. So now we have a story of an erroneous custom. I love this story. This story are about the people of Hosai who would separate the challah dough from rice dough. These uneducated ignoramuses, right? Because challah dough only has to be separated from the 5 grains, right? Wheat, spelt, rye, oats, and barley. The same 5 grains that make matzah are the 5 grains that become chametz, are the 5 grains that you separate challah from, right? We could really spend a lot of time.
And is one of them rice? One of them is rice?
No, rice is not one of them. Rice
Oh.
is not. I did not mention
Oh.
it. There are 5 grains. If someone wants to write it in the chat, that would be great. So I don't have to. Wheat, rye, R-Y-E, spelt, barley, oats. Those are the 5 grains that can become
Okay.
chametz, that can
Okay.
leaven, and the 5 grains that can make matzah, and the 5 grains that can make challah. That's it. It's a closed list.
Okay.
Rice, however, becomes a question in the Talmud because someone named Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, but rice kind of leavens, it sours, it becomes machmetzet. It has like a similarity to bread, and you can make bread out of it. So maybe you can make matzah out of it. Maybe it can become chametz.
Oh.
And we see here, this leads to an entire community separating challah from rice. And it's an erroneous practice. No one thinks you have to separate challah from rice, right? I don't even think Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says. Okay, hold on one second. So what do you do with this? Now, as Carol pointed out, she's in the class, this is so relevant today. They could not have anticipated an entire generation of people being gluten-free, right? Celiac and gluten-free, meaning it is a generation. I have 2 daughters who are gluten-free. I have 2 nieces and a sister-in-law who are celiac, right? Everyone is, Sarah Leah is gluten-free, right? I have students all the time gluten-free. And here we're talking about separating rice from challah. And there's a discussion. I'm not going to read the Gemara inside because I want to have time for some of the other Gemaras. Can anyone tell me there are 2 concerns? There are 2 concerns that come up. What are we concerned about? Anyone want to summarize either specifically from the story or there are 2 concerns. What happens if we have an erroneous custom and people continue to do it and other people see what they're doing and other people begin to do it? Why is that a problem? Why is
Because
that a problem?
that will spread to other things.
It'll spread to others. So other communities might copy this. Taking challah from rice dough is a joke. It's fake challah. It's not real. You make a blessing when you take challah dough. So you're making a blessing, taking God's name in vain. If a priest comes along and you give him this tithe, it's not a real, meaning anyone can eat it. The Israelite can eat it. The Levite can eat it. A priest doesn't have to eat this tithe, meaning this
Right.
is, anyone can eat this. Man, woman, and child, right? You can give it to your Gentile neighbor. So you're treating something with sanctity that has 0 sanctity. That seems to be a perversion of the law, right? That's the concern. Okay, yes, Naomi.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big concern is you're not supposed to embarrass somebody or humiliate somebody. So if somebody is doing something that they don't need to be doing, is it incumbent on you to correct them?
Okay, so that's a great question that I think we can extrapolate. You certainly don't want to embarrass the residents of Hosai. On the other hand, as I said, one thing that's really serious is taking God's name in vain. You're making a fake blessing. So what do I do there? Maybe I can pull their leader aside, the great grandfather, the oldest, the elders, and tell him quietly, meaning, do I want to let the people of Hosai know? So what's an interesting conclusion? What's the argument to not tell them? And this really touches on the gluten-free generation. Yes, Naomi's point is especially relevant in the next story, which we're going to look at, right? Not embarrassing people who are doing things out of ignorance. And then they say, wait, we're now concerned that if everyone in this city eats rice dough, gluten-free city, no one is going to know how to take challah. No one is not going to know how to wash their hands before eating bread. No one's going to know the grace after meals. On Passover, no one is going to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah, right? So suddenly, my concern for taking God's name in vain becomes weighed against losing major pieces of identity, of halakha, even though you're not required to do it in halakha. So what do we do? Right? Yes. So we have to weigh very carefully undoing practices that ultimately might be preserving. I heard a story, I've not traced the source, maybe someone knows the source, of when communities couldn't get a hold of an etrog, allowing them to use like a lemon, right? And as an etrog, right? This idea of, if we have 300 years without an etrog, even 100 years, 50 years with the way things are happening today, an entire generation, it's like today it's 100 years, 100 years, no one washes their hands and blesses after eating fake bread, rice bread. What's going to happen? All of those mishnayot, all of those halachot are going to become obsolete. They're going to get forgotten. So do we keep kind of faking it? Do we do it with pretendo? Right? Really very deep questions, meaning deep theological, deep halakhic, deep in terms of identity. And so, this question of, do we let people know the error of their ways? Will we embarrass them? In embarrassing them, will they go off and like slam the door on everything, on all practice? If we let them know that they're incorrect and it's an entire gluten-free city or country, then they may stop doing certain things that will never be remembered. When they start eating gluten again, it could be no one's going to remember how to wash and bench, right? Very, very interesting. Anyone have something they want to add before we get to the...
Yeah, I wanted to add one thing to it, which is to say that it's very relevant to this particular year of 2020, because there's been a lot of response around how to adapt halacha, etc., because with Zoom and all that. And so there's been a lot of changes that have occurred. And the question that people are grappling with is, once we go back to a non-COVID time, are people just going to say, well, I was doing this on Zoom, or this was acceptable then, can I just do that now like this? So it's
yes, no, Naomi, that was the question last year with the Zoom Seder. There was a major disagreement within Orthodoxy. Obviously, outside of Orthodoxy, they moved to Zoom services. Fine, that was the way they kept their congregations connected, and they probably had very good attendance throughout because it was on Zoom, and people were looking for that connection and meaning. In Orthodoxy, normally you cannot use your computer, you cannot use your phone, right? We don't use electronic devices. And we were facing a Passover in which you had many people alone, people suffering from depression, from anxiety, old people, right? Mental health issues. And there was a small contingency, mostly of Sephardi poskim, who were willing to permit it. And there was an outcry and an outrage and Melissa, and what are we going to do when it's over? Do we allow it for the moment? But next year, people are going to think it's more convenient. Very important questions. In the end, a lot of rabbis very quietly allowed all sorts of things, right? The question is, do we allow it publicly on Facebook, or do we do it what's called in Hebrew nekudati, localized, right? On a case-by-case situation. So each case understands they're being given a leniency for their situation as opposed to a blanket permission. But yes, that's exact. Of course, excellent example. Okay, let's take a look at the last the unit about the Gamliel brothers, and then we'll come back and we'll discuss a little more. The Gamliel brothers to me are fascinating. The reason the Gamliel brothers are interesting is they represent the elite of society. They are wealthy. They are elite. They are male privilege, right? They are very wealthy, very educated, right?
What page are you?
Sorry, can someone mute who I'm? Someone's.
What page?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm on page 4. Page 4. So we are now going to move to this, and I'm going to read this inside because these are the stories I want to use as a jumping off point. We already saw some of the concern for taking a community that eats rice dough and letting them know that that's erroneous, and the fear that on one hand, they think what they're doing is halakha, so that's mistaken halakha. On the other hand, there's a price to pay if we take it away from them. We may embarrass them. They may stop keeping the practice. and they may forget certain things like hamotzi and birkat hamazon. Okay. Now we're going on to 3 stories. This is all, by the way, in the tractate of Pesachim. And if we have to choose a tractate that really thinks about custom and practice and different communities and so on, Passover is a great time, because we saw just in our little chat how many of us have different customs on Passover. And that was already the case even in the time of the Talmud. Okay. So the Gemara says, if matters are permitted, let's talk about no example yet given. Something is permitted, but the community teaches it as if it's prohibited, like the rice dough. Rabbi Chisda says, are we dealing with Samaritans and not Jews? In other words, are we dealing with people who aren't from within? Now, this very much is about outside, inside, right? It's derogatory. The Samaritans are not really Jewish. And so what they do is absolutely not reflective of, are we going to think of Jews as Samaritans, right? Very, very derogatory comment. And now it brings a story. Wasn't it a ton in a Braita? And here's the story. We know in a Braita that 2 brothers may bathe together. Rochatzin shnei achin ke'achad. I'm at the bottom of page 4 in the English. The Hebrew is at the top of page 5. However, ein rochatzin shnei achin beKabul. In Kabul, 2 brothers do not bathe together. Okay? Totally permitted, no problem, again, but 2 brothers. And yet in Kabul, 2 brothers do not bathe together. U'maaseh b'Yehuda v'Hillel banav shel Rabban Gamliel sherachatzu shneim ke'achad beKabul. And the Yehuda and Hillel Gamliel show up in Kabul. Something that's interesting about them is that they travel. And Kabul is outside of Israel. I haven't. It might even be the Kabul. I don't know if they got as far as Afghanistan, but it is a north of Israel. It's a city of Kabul, and they're from Israel, so they've left Israel. And the sons of Gamliel, and they bathe together. That's what they do. I mean, they go into the bathhouse together. Nothing wrong, nothing inappropriate about that. And what happens is, in this city, la'azah aleihem kol medina, and really the Hebrew is even more aggressive than the English, that they are mocked by the members. It says denounced, but laz has within it also mockery, right? They are shamed. Someone mentioned you don't want to shame people, but the city of Kabul is so outraged at this impropriety that they denounce them, they mock them. And what's interesting is the response. What do they say? Mi'amenu lo ra'inu kach. We've never seen anything like this. V'nishmat Hillel v'yatza l'bayit hachitzon v'lo ratza lomar lahem mutarim hatem. And Hillel behaves, both of them, with such kindness and respect, and dignifies their stupid practice. Right? I'm going to use a strong word. Right? He doesn't put them down. He doesn't start bringing a Braita. He doesn't say to them, "Do you know who I am? I'm a Gamliel. My father is like one of the authors of the Mishnah. Like, you don't get more rabbinic than my family. Really? You're going to tell me what's allowed and not allowed?" Instead, Hillel slips into the outer chamber of the bathhouse and leaves his brother in the bathhouse so that they're no longer bathing together, and did not want to tell them, "You are permitted," which again shows so much forbearance, such a relinquishing of ego. Right. And so what I love about the stories we're going to see 3 now about the Gamliel brothers, is that despite the privilege, right, everything, all the privilege you can imagine, right, men who are educated and wealthy, and they travel together, they are compassionate towards others. They recognize this is not the place for them to start lecturing, re-educating the natives, right? That is not. There's nothing wrong with this practice. You're not taking God's name in vain. It's certainly not prohibited, but they are not going to educate the natives, right? And there's something very compassionate about that. Now we have the next story. Yotzin b'kordas kison b'Shabbat. You can go out, I love that word, it's a Greek word, with wide shoes that are like slippers on Shabbat. Now the concern there is they could come to fall off your feet. You could end up picking them up and carrying them in the public thoroughfare, which is a major biblical prohibition. Terrible. But the rabbis basically felt there was no real problem. These are wide shoes. They're like slippers, but okay, people will pick them up and put them back on their feet. I mean, we don't have to be stringent about everything. And in Bire, people did not go out with these shoes. And Yehuda and Hillel show up. Here we go. And they show up and they wear their wide shoes, probably the height of fashion, right? Or very comfortable, doesn't really matter. And they go out and the people say to them, we have never seen it, again, mockery, denouncing, we've never seen anything like this. And immediately they remove their shoes and give them to their Gentile servants, because of course, they're wealthy, they're traveling, they have their servants, and did not want to tell the residents of the city, mutarinatan, this is not halacha. What you're doing is not halacha. It's just a practice. What are you doing? This is not, certainly you shouldn't be humiliating visitors who come to your city. But they recognize in both the cases that there would be more to lose than to gain. That when you go into another community, you have to go with respect. You don't get to bring the academy into places in which the academy is not the center of how people operate. People have their ways and their practices and their customs, and it doesn't really matter if it's right or wrong in these cases. No harm is really done, right? It's not quite like the challah, which is actually more halakhically significant. And so they choose silence rather than, no one's going to listen anyway. And the third story, it turns out you can sit on Gentile stools on Shabbat, even though these stools are used for buying and selling. And in Akko, now they're back in the land of Israel, they don't. That's the practice, but it's allowed, right? All of these things are examples of things that are permitted according to the law. And what makes them prohibited is merely custom. And yet the custom is so deeply entrenched that when the people see it, they recoil. They respond aggressively, verbally, very aggressively. And now we have Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, a different Gamliel, doesn't matter, same family, who sat on Gentile city stools on Shabbat in Akko. And again, in all our days, we have never seen such a thing. And again, we have a story that he moves onto the ground and did not want to tell them that they are permitted. And now the Gemara answers that the people in the cities, since sages are not found among them, are like that of Samaritans. And there's something offensive, and I also want to defend this statement. Basically, what the Gemara concludes, but if we talk about who the Talmud is written for, it's written for the men of the academy. It's written for the Gamliels. And yet many of the stories show their awareness of what's happening outside. And they said, we put down the Samaritans who aren't really Jewish. They have some Jewish practices, some biblical, they're more of a biblical religion. But there are a lot of Jews who don't know much more than the Samaritans. And that's a moment we have to acknowledge that. All of that we're doing in the academy and the Mishnah and the Gemara and the Halacha, and that's not happening in a lot of Jewish communities, says this piece of Gemara. And part of what allows continuity, right, resilience, passing on traditions, sometimes stems from a place of ignorance. If we start taking that away from people who are not fully literate, who are not scholars, and there are no scholars, there's no rabbis in their community, or the rabbis in their community are not learned men, pious men, but not necessarily learned men, then what are you going to leave them with? And so really, again, a very beautiful testimony to a certain, you don't get it a lot in the Talmud, but a certain kindness towards those who are connected to Jewish tradition, connected to practice, connected to ritual, right? They're doing what they're doing, and some of it absolutely makes no sense and is not justifiable in terms of halakha. And at the end of the day, that's not all that determines how religious you are or how not, how connected you are or not. Sometimes it's that protest to change. It's that community rising up and saying, we've never seen such a thing. We never heard such a thing. Don't bring this foreign narishkeit into our community. We're afraid of it. Don't bring this into our community. And that brings us back to the first Mishnah, of course. What happens if you go from one place to another place? The Mishnah says it can lead to machloket. It could lead to the kind of divisiveness that can tear down the very simple foundation upon which all of this identity, religious identity, Jewish identity, however you want to fill in identity, rests. So I'm going to pause for a moment to take some comments and questions. And I'd like to share one more one more thought from the text, but happy to now open it up for a few moments if people either want to raise their hands or take turns, however you want to do it. I think we've been doing it very nicely. If anyone, let me see if in the chat someone said anything in the meantime. Yes, someone asked Ellie Ron, horseradish instead of lettuce, horseradish root, right? How many people, raise your hands, use horseradish root? Thumbs up. Grew up with horseradish root? Yeah, I'm seeing a lot. Let me see the other. Okay. Anyone only use lettuce? Anyone grow up with lettuce? Not a lot of Svardim here, right? Okay. Horseradish root is from Poland. It's from Poland, Russia, Lithuania, right? They didn't have the greens that certainly not in April, March, April, right? A place of a lot of very boiled cabbage, boiled potatoes. And that's not really going to cut it when it comes to maror. So the horseradish root really is not an invention, meaning it certainly is bitter. They looked for something that was bitter. But suddenly in the 20th century, we read the Talmud and realize, oh, romaine lettuce, endive. Oh, I can go to my greengrocer and now I'm actually using the lettuce that the ancestors in the Talmud used. But wait a minute.
Yeah.
My grandparents used horseradish root. We all choke on it and we cry and we laugh about it and we have to like run around the table. You know, of course, you can imagine a young brother running after his sisters with a spoonful of horseradish, or we have fun with that. Do we really want to go back to the practice of the Talmud, even if that's the more authentic, accurate interpretation?
So they had endive?
Excellent example. What, Ann?
They had endive?
They had endive. Yeah, they had endive.
Oh,
They mention a whole variety of like green leafed lettuces. Endive, of course, is somewhat bitter. Some of them we know what it is, but it seems like endive is the most.
From Belgium. It comes from Belgium.
So people far more scholarly than me have you know, I don't know if it's exactly the endive of the belt, but they say that it's endive. You know, again, I can't. A bitter lettuce. So again, that's very, very interesting. And so you have the truth is in Tekoa, a farm not far from me, they sell endive and they put the verse from the Mishnah, the text from the Mishnah on the package. So you know that you're like, right, again, it's a great marketing gimmick. But there are people still, my makolet still sells horseradish root, right? And sometimes I buy it just to have on the Seder plate so my children can know that's what my parents and grandparents did, even though we don't use it. But I kind of want to maintain fidelity. So I want to talk about kitniot, and that's really where I think that's all I'm really going to have time for. Because Olivia just asked a question and I'd like to talk a little bit about that with your permission. And then I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes after. So before moving into this final piece where I'll talk about something that reflects a lot of what we're talking about, right? This idea that customs, how, you know, what we pass on to our children, to our grandchildren, often have more power than law, which is sometimes very dry and sometimes very rote. It's the customs, the way, do we give gifts? Do we give money on Hanukkah? What kind of candles do we get, right? Whatever it is, what we eat on Purim. A lot of times it's food, by the way. Food is very big. But as we saw in the chat, there were other customs. How you do a birthday in your family, right, is very, very often very, very particular to the family. And those become very beloved to us and they become very close to us. And that's why, you know, when what we just did, where you can retract back all the way to the origin, and you say, really, that's why we do it? Oh my God, I thought it was much more mystical. I thought it was much more intellectual. I thought it was much more rational. That's why we do it, right? And yet, Rabbi Yochanan recognizes, yes, your parents started to do it because they financially could afford to. They wanted to honor the Shabbat. And Rabbi Yochanan says, I'm actually very worried about what's going to happen if you step away from that. What's going to happen to everything else you inherited from your father, right? What's going to happen to the structure? Right? How much integrity is the structure going to have if we begin loosening pieces from it, even if they're not obligatory? I think this is a question many in the postmodern world and in the Jewish world are asking: how many pieces can we shift? How many pieces can we move and still maintain a sense of connection, of authenticity, of integrity, right? You have the secular, I've heard Chiloni Israelis who are often very, very secular. They want the Haredim, they're not interested in me. I'm not authentic, but the Haredim, that's authentic Judaism, right? They want the Haredim to continue to look and practice Haredi Judaism. That's authentic. That's the Judaism they don't practice, right? So again, it's very interesting when we look at other people's dress and customs and food, and we say, That's real, right? They don't want, yeah, why and what? They think it's not, again, it's not for them. But they appreciate, right, seeing how other people practice, how other people incorporate ritual. And so, at this time of year, as we move into Passover, it's certainly the time of year to think about our origin stories and our journeys and our narratives and our customs and what we want to pass on, right? There are certain things I've incorporated over the years that my parents didn't, that I hope my children will pass on, right? And so I think this is the time of year where we most think about it. And sometimes things happen accidentally. I don't know about the Manischewitz crumb custom, but I love it. Meaning I can imagine one year someone was playing around with the crumbs on the cake, either, whatever, making little patterns or whatever you're making or throwing them at each other. Suddenly that becomes our custom. We throw crumbs, right? And that's what the kids look forward to. And that's what they laugh about. And even as they become adults, they're still doing it. And it doesn't always have to make sense. And sometimes that's what most defines us, the things that are least, not rational, not intellectual, and yet are evocative of a memory of what, of what we brought with us. So I want to talk about Kitniyot, because I think Kitniyot, in closing, is really an excellent example of customs that are being re-examined very, very critically in the 20th and 21st century. And the rabbinic response on both sides, Sephardi and Ashkenazi, is consistently, please allow the Sephardim to eat the legumes and the Ashkenazim to not. And it's coming from both communities. But I want to talk a little bit about what's happened that has upset the balance. If we go back to the 12th century, Rabbi Eliezer of Worms is the first rabbinic scholar to mention that Sephardim eat lentils and peas, and Ashkenaz, black-eyed peas, black-eyed peas was from the chat, lentils and beans, I think, and Ashkenazim do not. And of course, from that moment onward, you start very clearly seeing the split between the Middle Eastern and Mediterranean countries and Germany, France, Poland. Some of it clearly has to do with dietary differences. Some of it has to do with agricultural differences, how they plant fields, and whether there's any sort of cross-contamination between wheat and other crops like legumes. And as it continues, I just want the Beit Yosef, not the Beit Yosef, it's Rav Yerucham says, this is a minhag shtut. He laughs at it. This is a ridiculous custom to not eat legumes. And yet, as the years go on, the centuries, it becomes more and more deeply entrenched as the way Ashkenazi Jews practice versus Sephardi. No one thinks there's a kashrut issue, right? No Ashkenazi looks down on a Sephardi for eating kitniyot. Some Sephardim look down on Ashkenazim, by the way, for not eating kitniyot. That's very funny in the sources. They think it's ridiculous. The Torah, the Shulchan Aruch, they don't really understand why Ashkenazim don't. However, it becomes more and more part of different identities. Now, at a certain point, already in the 17th and 18th century, and this to me is also so interesting, people are very poor in Poland and Lithuania and Russia, and legumes are really cheap. Beans, chickpeas, lentils, that's poor man's food. Really nourishing, really filling, really nutritious, right? And already minority rabbis begin to ask, why are our Ashkenazim being bankrupt? Passover is so expensive. They have to bake a lot of matzah, which is time consuming and expensive. And they're not being as careful with the matzah as they should be. Not to mention meat and chicken and eggs and fish, they could be eating legumes, right? Legumes are really cheap. Join me, says Rav Yaakov Emden, he says to his fellow rabbis. It's a custom. It's not law. He cannot get any rabbis to really join him. And he's responding to the poverty. He's saying it is so difficult when custom becomes more deeply entrenched than halacha, because it becomes our identity, and it's very hard to shake that up. So I now want to go to the 20th century. I will say in Israel in the 1950s, there was hunger, and some Ashkenazim began to eat legumes, right? When there's hunger, obviously there are leniencies. I think Rav Kook writes about it at the beginning of the 20th century and onward. However, it was always considered to be the default, right? We don't really want to be eating legumes. In the late, I really feel from probably in the last 30, 40 years, this is every year, why can't Ashkenazim eat kitniot, right? And the response in both sides is absolutely not, right? This is our custom. This is our practice, say the Sephardim. Why are you trying to take from us one of these pillars of our identity as if it belongs to you? And the Ashkenazi, certainly the Haredim say, are you kidding? Like, we don't even let that into our house. Yes, Sephardim and the chief rabbi, they can all eat that, but we, absolutely not. We treat it like chametz, right? This is like, absolutely not. And so it really speaks to a lot of what we're talking about. I will say two big things have happened. Sephardim and Ashkenazim get married a lot in this country. There's been a real in fact, Aviva's sister is married to a Sephardi, right? Many people have Sephardi family members, and some of those families have started to say enough. We want to eat with our in-laws. We want to eat with our machatanisters. We want to be able to host everyone. They eat kitniot, we don't. We're a family. And so you are having some erosion because in 2,000 years, so much intermarriage never happened. And now we have a lot of Sephardi Ashkenazi coupling. And those families are beginning to, especially if they're, a little more liberal with their, not with observance, God forbid, but with their interpretation, with understanding the sources and making decisions, you're definitely seeing that happen. The other community, and Eliran is going to like this, if he's still here, yes, he is, vegans. Vegans have become a growing movement, not to vegan, gluten-free, which I have two of those, right? Those are really populations who have slowly begun to erode some of the kitniot conversation. I admire the vegans who, again, it's their practice, it's their identity. They kind of like the challenge of finding what to eat for the week when you can't eat eggs, right? What do you eat on Pesach if you don't go 120 eggs last year? What do you do? However, again, it speaks to, I don't want to give into this. It's 7 days and I want to maintain my fidelity to the custom, but there are many vegans and Ashkenazi rabbis who are willing to make allowances for vegans, given that it's their entire way of life and their entire nutritional base. And I just like someone wrote, my son identifies as Sephardi. Yes, because your sons are half and half. My son identifies as Sephardi, right? This idea that we suddenly are exposed to other cultures, other communal practices. We say, wait, I want some of that. I'm going to eat my gefilte fish and my school, right? I'm going to integrate between different practices from different communities. That is something that's never really existed. It existed when women married men who had, again, in marriage. But this idea of suddenly being exposed to the wonderful customs and practices of other communities and saying, look, I want to take a little of that. For me, I'll say, someone mentioned black eyed peas, Erica, on Rosh Hashanah. That came from the Sephardim. How many of you do a Rosh Hashanah Seder? I'm going to say, I introduced it to my family. Anyone here do a Seder on Rosh Hashanah where they eat all sorts of foods besides apple and honey? The black eyed peas, the leeks, the string beans, the carrots, and you make these funny blessings where you say, let us destroy our enemies and so on and so on, right? In Israel, I don't know an Ashkenazi who doesn't do it. And that origin, that's totally from the Sephardi communities, and no one has an issue. That's great, right? That's inclusion. That's wonderful. But talk about kitniot, like the machloket, right? Suddenly within rabbinic forums, but also within communities, right? Sephardi community, Ashkenazi community becomes very, very heated because you're trying to erode something that speaks to their ancestors, to their origin, to their origins, to something that really differentiated. And we don't want to all be alike all the time, right? Sometimes we want the customs that distinguish us. And that definitely, I think, is reflective of the big kitniot debate that goes on every year. And the rabbinate, certainly in Israel, it was teetering for a while. Could we just say, since we all live together, we can kind of unhinge that practice, that custom? And no way, there's no way. Again, the Haredim, who are the majority of the Ashkenazim, would never agree to it. And again, it's just too deeply entrenched, and too taboo. So just to conclude, really, as I said, I already concluded once. I'm going to conclude one more time. sometimes the customs, right, the things that identify and distinguish us, even if they limit us and restrict us, are the things we hold very, very close. Sometimes, and this is becoming more prevalent, we become acquainted with someone else's practice and custom, and we say, hey, I want to incorporate that into my holiday, into my liturgy. I like some of the liturgy. By the way, the Sephardim have some beautiful liturgies for the high holidays, particularly their slichot. I know many Ashkenazim who say Sephardi slichot because they're very powerful, right? So we are more accustomed today to borrowing from one another, to engaging more broadly in Jewish practice, custom, and ritual because we're more exposed to it. And of course, it'll be interesting to see going forward how that affects us, right? How that affects some of our ancestors, what we're bringing from the past into the future. And, I think it's wonderful. I think it's wonderful to learn from one another. I think it's okay to say, no, I don't do this because this is not what my parents did. And I think it's okay sometimes also to incorporate new things that we think will connect us and engage us more deeply. Yes, Jeff, there are those who are so I'm gonna stop I want to wish everyone a happy Passover. And thank you for joining me. You're certainly welcome to be in touch.
Chag Sameach.
And Chag Sameach. And yes, Jeff, there are those who will not eat in a home that uses kitniot dishes. There are people like that. Quinoa is the gateway grain, and they still write on it in Israel only for those who eat kitniot. So you have to be in the know, right? That quinoa, kitniot, quinoa sounds like kitniot, right? So maybe it's all this.
It wasn't for kitniot in Israel.
What?
Oh, that's funny.
And people, and what you're saying, Jeff, speaks to the, is it ignorance? Is it like if we don't treat kitniot like chametz, people are going to take it less seriously, right? So, I've had opinions that I shouldn't use the same pots and pans that I cook kitniot for my kids in. I don't eat kitniot, they do. No, again, this is where maybe I'm more of the Samaritan. I'm like, yeah, no, that doesn't make any sense. Meaning this is clearly kosher for Passover, and I'm not going to eat it, but I'm not waiting 24 hours with my pots or using separate pots or so on. Which the rabbis who issue that ruling are saying, look, it's okay to have kitniot, but remember, you can't eat kitniot. Only they can because they're special dispensation. I think we're all adult enough to be able to distinguish between eating it and using our pots for cooking kosher food. But again, I recognize not everyone will agree. Jeff already mentioned people won't go into a home of someone who has kitniot, won't eat from plates that have kitniot, and all of that is creating more and more scaffolding for this custom that has become so deeply entrenched as part of how Passover is observed. So thank you very much.